Hello everyone, this is Major Green, also known as Nitpicking Nerd, and this is a review of episode 7 of Star Trek Discovery. And as everybody knew right away, even from the preview, this episode is basically the same premise, the same idea as in the TNG episode Cause and Effect, which was about a time loop in which everything repeats itself and the ship keeps blowing up and everything starts all over again each time, with only certain characters realizing that everything is repeating and having memory of the previous cycles. And this is an idea that was used many times in many science fiction shows and movies. Groundhog Day, SG-1, recently in Edge of Tomorrow. And the idea itself is a good idea, it's a neat idea with a lot of potential, so I don't mind seeing it again as long as they improve upon it, meaning they add some new twist on it or they do it better than it was done before, even though I do prefer to see new ideas. However, a lot of times an older idea is such a good idea that it kind of deserves a better treatment, and so if someone wants to use an older idea to make a better movie or a better episode out of the same idea, I'd be fine with that. And I think that in SG-1 they did this idea very well because they used it for comedy. They fully exploited the opportunity that this plot device gave them to do a lot of funny stuff they wouldn't normally be able to do in any other episode. And so in SG-1 this was an example of an old idea being used very well. And just yesterday I made a video talking about copyright, and I said I'm okay with shows kind of borrowing ideas from each other, and a lot of people thought I'm defending CBS. I'm not actually defending CBS, I'm defending creativity in general. So for example, shows like The Orville, which I really like, would not be able to exist if copyright laws would be too draconian, because they do often borrow the same ideas as in other shows and in older literature and stuff like that. So that show would not exist if the copyright laws would be too strict. And so that's why I think copyright laws should be more lenient, especially when you deal with general ideas that lots of people can come up with. I think that would be bad if someone who wants to write a book, for example, would be afraid to publish a book before he reads all the other books in existence, just out of fear that the same idea might have been written by someone else in the past. I remember when I first saw TNG's Cause and Effect, and I was so shocked at the opening scene when the Enterprise exploded. That was probably the best and most shocking episode opening ever. And all throughout the episode I was wondering what is going on, what's coming next. It was like a mystery plot. It was a very exciting episode, a lot of tension. And so I remember it as a very good episode when I first saw it. And now in this episode we basically know exactly what's happening right away, and it feels kind of boring. Maybe new viewers will find it more interesting if they never saw this type of story before, and maybe they would find it more exciting, more mysterious. However, even for them I think it might be the opposite problem actually, that things might be too rushed and too jumbled in this episode. So if someone doesn't understand this concept right away, maybe he would be lost in this episode. So I'm really not sure how new viewers or small kids and so on, how they would react to such an episode. So I will now go over this episode and will try to analyze it in a very nitpicking way, like I like to do. And there is something I noticed in many episodes before but I never mentioned, and that is that all the equipment is always marked with USS Discovery, including stuff like the pillows, the sheets in the rooms, in their beds, all kinds of stuff like that in the rooms. And that's kind of strange. Why everything is marked USS Discovery? Are they afraid that people will steal the pillow sheets? It's almost like in today's military or in hospitals and stuff like that. But the reason they do it today, because people actually do steal stuff like that from hospitals and from military bases and all those kinds of places. However, this is the future in which they have synthesizers that can create clothing. We've seen that. So are they really that afraid that someone, some guest on the ship will actually steal pillows? So it's kind of ridiculous that everything has to be marked USS Discovery. And Michael is recording a personal log, and she says that this ship became the most important weapon in the war against the Klingons. But didn't they decide an episode ago that they will stop jumping into Klingon territory because replicating this technology is much more important? That it's not a good idea to risk this ship, which is one of a kind technology. So I guess they changed their minds in between episodes again. And Captain Lorca continues to play with the holograms as if he's Tony Stark. And I made a long rant about the holograms on the show, so I'm not going to go over all of that again. But I do want to add one more thing. In a Deep Space Nine episode called The Visitor, we saw the future of the DS9 crew who took the old Defiant ship on a mission. And Dr. Bashir said something like, I didn't operate a two-dimensional control panel in a long time. How did we manage? And that implied that on newer ships they actually use some kind of a 3D control panel, which I assume would have to be holographic. And what he said basically means that they didn't use that before. that they always use the two-dimensional control panel, meaning normal buttons. And yet on this show, a century earlier, apparently people were always using these 3D holograms with their hands, like Tony Stark. And just a few years later in the original series, suddenly no one was using that again. So that's why there is a discrepancy. That's why it's a continuity problem in my opinion. Now Lieutenant Stamets, the science guy who pilots the spore drive, he was annoying as hell in the first episodes, but ever since he changed his DNA to interact with the spores, his personality took a complete 180. Suddenly he's the nicest guy ever. And it's kind of strange how no one else on the ship seems worried by this. If it changed his brain so much, how come everybody are so okay with that? I guess everyone are just happy that he's not as annoying as before. And the same kind of thing happened to Tilly. Her character also kind of changed 180 degrees. She was introduced as some sort of shy, insecure, nerdy woman who doesn't know how to socialize, and yet suddenly she's the coolest party animal. She's basically the opposite of what she was when they first introduced her. So that was also a bit strange, and there is no technobabble excuse for that change. And as for the party scene itself, which repeated a lot of times this episode, it looks and sounds too much like a present day party. And I'm not saying that it has to be like in TNG, in which all the parties seem to be kind of nerdy, or like old people's parties, you know, with quiet classical music and people talking gently, or playing 3D chess. That was the sort of parties they had in TNG. So I am okay with a different kind of a more wild party. So I'm not saying that all the parties in the future have to be the same way. And of course different people have different tastes. However, it still seems a little bit off on too many levels. It has loud hip-hop music, weird flickering lights, which I guess does fit the special effects of this show. I think maybe they just use the same lamps they use for the special effects. You know, whenever they show a shuttle flying through some nebula, you always see those flickering lights, those blue and red lights. And it looks the same exact way in this party. So I guess they just use the same lamps they used for those special effects. They use the same lights for this party scene. And overall, I think they're trying to make this show look cooler for new audience, to break the image of Star Trek as a nerdy show, so they have stuff like this. And they probably think that the old nerdy fans will continue to watch no matter what. And at the same time, they are trying to appeal to a new, broader audience. And so they are trying to make it look more cool and less nerdy, I guess. So back to the plot. So they encounter a biological space creature which lives in space. And we've seen creatures like this before in Star Trek. In a TNG episode, Galaxy's Child, they encounter such a creature. And they all seem to be quite amazed by it, as if it's the first time they ever saw such a creature. And yet here, apparently, it's a common thing. Now, they did say that this species is near extinction, and so I guess maybe it didn't exist anymore by the time of TNG, and so that's why Picard was so amazed to see a space creature. And even though he previously seen such a creature in the episode Tin Man, also in Deep Space Nine we also saw a space creature once. So overall, I don't think there is a direct contradiction. I don't think there is a continuity problem with having a space creature here. However, it is a little bit strange that apparently the Prime Directive doesn't apply on space creatures, because they say that they have to save this creature because it's on a list of endangered species. So they beam the creature into the ship, and then a mud comes out of it, and apparently he's wearing an Andorian spacesuit. And I did like that design. It looks like something in the style of the original series, and yet at the same time it looks futuristic and advanced. And that's the sort of stuff we need to see more of in the show. Stuff that is similar to the original series and yet looks good, in a kind of futuristic yet retro kind of way. And as for the space creature, it did look cool. However, it didn't really have anything more to do with the rest of the plot, and so I guess it was just there to add some eye candy. And this is something that this show is doing all the time. They show us a lot of interesting looking things, but never actually doing anything with them. For example, all the strange looking extras on the bridge, I talked about it before. We still haven't gotten to know any of them. We still know nothing about any of them. They are all just there for the background to be visually interesting. Like that robot chick, for example. What the hell is her story? And it's funny how in this episode, in all the scenes on the bridge, they keep cutting to a reaction shot of her face, and she always makes that same robotic sound when they show her, and they must have done it at least 10 times in this episode. And at some point I started to wonder if they're actually just reusing the same footage of her reaction shot over and over again. So if all these cool looking characters are just going to stay in the background for this entire series and never explored in any way, this will be very annoying, so they better start doing something with them. Otherwise they are just as good as background paintings or something. Like, it's just there for the beauty of it. And imagine in TNG if we only ever saw Geordi in the background and we never got to know what's the deal with his visor. Or just seeing Data sitting in the background. Someone with pale white skin and never getting to know anything about him. and only have the human characters be part of the story, only Picard and Riker. And all the other ones would only be on the bridge as side characters, only saying yes sir, no sir, and stuff like that, and never being part of any story, and we never got to learn anything about them. Imagine how bad that would be if all the interesting characters would just be background scenery. So that's how it feels like on this show with all these background characters. And so the same with this space whale creature. It's just in the episode for a momentary eye candy, I guess. It's not actually a part of the plot in any way. So Harry Mudd basically uses some advanced tech, which he somehow obtains all the time. And he does fit his character in the original series. In all the episodes he appeared, he always had some sort of advanced technology, either advanced androids, or with shape-shifting potions, or love crystals and stuff like that. So maybe he has a secret stash of advanced technology hidden away somewhere. So I guess it kind of fits his character. So this time he has some kind of time crystal which he can use to create a time loop in which only he remembers the previous loops, or so he thinks. And this basically allows him to be like in a computer game that he replays again and again until he learns everything he needs to know to take over the ship. So this is similar to the movie Edge of Tomorrow. Now the thing is, he's doing all of this to take over the ship to give it to the Klingons. But with this type of technology of repeating a time loop, wouldn't he be super rich anyway? If he sells this technology to someone, I guess it's because he has a personal vendetta against Captain Lorca because he left him in that Klingon prison, so this would also give him the opportunity to get revenge. And there was a montage scene in which they show us that he kills Lorca over and over again, and that was kind of funny. Now the problem is that in the original series, Mudd was not a murderer, he was just a con man, he was a snake oil salesman type. He was more of a comic relief kind of villain. And yet here he is like a murderer, a psychopath, a serial killer who enjoys killing people and enjoys watching them suffer. So he's like a total maniac psychopath in this episode. And he goes around murdering people in the most gruesome ways he can find. And so it just doesn't fit the character from the original series. And also nothing he does in this episode really feels comedic, except that one scene I mentioned in which Lorca is getting killed repeatedly. But aside from that, his character was not really that funny. He was just a murdering psychopath all episode long. Another complaint I have about the visuals is that all the death scenes look a little bit too clean. All the CGI looks kind of cheap and fake. And I actually praised this show in episode 3 when they showed those bloody gory bodies in episode 3. That looked really good. However, in all the episodes since, they always show people getting vaporized, and it's always in a very clean way, kind of disappearing in a puff of smoke, which looks like a very cheap special effect. And yes, I do know the other shows also did that, but I kind of expected more from this show in terms of the visual effects at least. So this is a bit disappointing that they kill off people this way in a kind of clean puff of smoke way. Also, Mudd said that one of his weapons causes a painful death, and yet when we saw it kill Ash, he didn't even scream or express any pain, and he didn't really seem like he minds that much getting vaporized. But you know, this might actually be another clue that he is indeed Vok the Klingon. Do you remember the first episode in which he burned his hand and didn't feel any pain apparently? So maybe he has a very high tolerance for pain, so maybe that's why he didn't show any pain when he was vaporized. But actually later Michael also gets killed by the same weapon, and she also doesn't seem to mind that much. So I guess it's not really a painful weapon like Mudd said it was. And speaking of Ash, there are no new clues that he is indeed Vok the Klingon. And also I thought to myself, why would he be helping to stop Mudd from taking over the ship if Mudd is planning to give it to the Klingons? So isn't that in his own interest? So wouldn't he actually side with Mudd? However, the explanation might be that since he's an exile from the other Klingons and he wants to prove himself worthy to them, so presumably he wants to take over the Discovery himself, and therefore he would indeed try to prevent Mudd from doing that and stealing his glory, because he wants to take over the ship himself. And so I guess it's not really a problem. And as for his love story with Michael, I think it is setting her up for a major heartbreak when he turns out to be a Klingon spy. So I guess that's where they're going with it. So overall the idea of this episode was good, but I'm not sure about the execution of it. Too many things didn't really make sense. For example, why exactly did Michael have to dance with Ash in order to explain the situation to him while the ship is in danger and the time is limited, yet she has to dance with him to explain it to him? Is he really more inclined to believe her because she's flirting with him? And as for her secret of never having been in love, that kind of got me rolling my eyes, because really that's the big secret that no one would have guessed. I mean, that's not the sort of thing you would tell someone to say to you to prove that they know something only you know. It seems like too general of a statement. When she first whispered a secret to his ear, I imagine a lot more interesting stuff, such as maybe she told him that she was actually born a male and that's why she has a male name. Something like that, some kind of crazy secret that no one would have guessed. That's where my mind went when she whispered that to him. Or maybe that she has a secret foster brother that no one knows about, maybe Cyborg. That would have been a nice Easter egg. And yet she chooses to tell him something like this about feelings and so on, so this kind of got me rolling my eyes. Now the stupidest part of the episode was the ending. They somehow contact his wife instead of the Klingons and then they show up seconds later, literally seconds later. This is ludicrous speed, even faster than the spore drive, I think. Literally seconds to arrive. And speaking of Matt's wife, I could understand his attitude toward his wife in the original series, but here, why exactly is he running away from her again? She's got looks and bucks? Sounds like you've got yourself a heck of a deal. And also, I guess 10 years is a long time because, damn. And also, why the hell did they let him go in the end of this episode? Even though he technically didn't kill anyone in the end of this loop, but he still had the intention of stealing the ship and to give some of the crew over to the Klingons. Also, they knew that he did kill people in the other timelines and was taking joy in it. So from his point of view, he did kill people and torture people, so that has to count for something. And so why the hell did they let him go? Especially since they know that he's so resourceful, with access to all kinds of advanced technology apparently. So wouldn't he be considered to be a very dangerous person? So at the very least they should have debriefed him and not just let him go as if nothing happened. Also, he knows everything about the spore drive, which is Starfleet's biggest secret, so he can sell that information to the Klingons. So would they really let him go when he knows so much? So this really doesn't make any sense. If it was all a comedy episode, maybe that would be fine, but it doesn't feel like comedy. So overall, the idea of this episode was kind of okay, the execution not so much. Some elements were good, but overall this episode was still too flawed and kind of pointless and even stupid at times. And as I said in the beginning, I have no problem with recycling old ideas as long as they improve upon them. But I'm not sure that's the case here. And so I don't think I really like this episode, even though I think on average it's probably better than other episodes of this show. However, it's still not really that good. But let me know what you think. Did you enjoy this episode? What do you think about all the points I raised? I'll be happy to continue the discussion in the comments. So that's it for now, and I will see you later.